Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome into another edition of Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. As Phil and I are going to talk this week about the children. We're going to talk about how they roll into or factor into your retirement plans, right? How they're part.
Which sometimes they do.
Right. Or it should be, maybe, the retirement discussion. Even if the part of the discussion is to say they're not getting a dime, it's still going to be part of the discussion. What's going on, buddy? How you doing?
Absolutely. Doing good. Yeah, to your point, we're just talking about some of the weather coming our way. So
yeah, we're both on the mend.
Craziness. So yeah.
We're still on the mend from the crud, but we're getting there. So, and yeah, the weather fiascos. Yeah, is 60 degrees yesterday. It's going to be 12 in a day and a half. It's that kind of stuff doesn't help.
We're not having that kind of swings here, but it's just that time of year, and weather coming again, which is fine.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's January after all.
Mother Nature's off her meds once again.
That's right.
Look, if you got kids, this or grandkids, this podcast is for you. Podcast is for you anyway. If you're thinking about retirement or getting close to it, but I got this laundry list of stuff here, Phil. So let me get into some of this. Often they come up in the discussion again, like we talked about when you're doing the planning, right?
Yep.
And many times we see, couples have varying viewpoints on what they want to do for the kids, with the kids, so on and so forth. So I got kind of 5 general categories here. We'll just talk about how it kind of factors into what you do when it comes to navigating through the conversations. Okay. So we'll start with kind of still working, a little bit younger, on the younger side, the college expenses, right? So if you are going to help, if you're, in your, let's say, late 40s, early 50s, and you're going to help your kids going into college, are you talking about that and preparing for that so that you are not sacrificing yourself on the back end when they're coming out of college, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, that's part of the discussion. If we work with clients that still have kids that are, maybe late high school, early college, what does that look like? I mean, what's your plan? Are you planning on paying for some?
Are you funding it,
or
right?
All? Yeah. Are you funding it personally, or what portion of it are you funding? Have you saved for that?
Yeah.
And if not, are you financing it? Are you, taking out Parent Plus loans and different loans? I mean, you've got to be really careful, because depending on the type of the loan, even though, it's a Parent Plus loan and they're going to pay it back, you're on the hook, so you've got to understand the risk to you in retirement, that what happens if they don't get the job they anticipate. They run into some financial concerns and they can't pay it.
So you want them to have skin in the game, right? That becomes a big conversation. I mean, some parents, they're like, look, we're in a pretty good place. I want to pay for it. It was, we've all gone through those conversations where we have our kids and we go, they will go to college. They're going to be the first one in the family, or, there's all these different kinds of things that wind up happening. But the world has changed so much, Phil, that maybe that's not the immediate go-to, or at least should be considered, saying, hey, look, the schools have gotten out of control clearly with the pricing, right?
The cost is just outrageous. Yeah.
Finding that happy medium maybe is really worth that conversation piece. The kids having some skin in the game, because you can finance college. You can't finance retirement.
Yes, exactly. Right? And that's really the key point when you're in this stage, kind of nearing retirement. Yeah. We talked about the red zone. So especially if it happens anytime in that stage,
right.
Understand pros and cons. I mean, hey, your wish and goal might be, I'd love to pay, be able to pay for my kids' education.
Right.
I had to pay for it and it was a struggle. I don't want them to go through that. I understand. I get it.
Yep.
But don't just jump into doing that without understanding what does it look like.
So yeah, just make sure that you're definitely talking through it. And with the price of colleges being so just outlandish, really talk through and strategize, if you haven't been saving, on what that's going to look like. Of course, we all kind of know the general stuff, but sometimes we tend to put our heart out there and say, well, I've got to do this for my kids. And maybe you also got to be a little honest and say, look, is my kid actually college material? Because at the end of the day,
just having a general college degree anymore costs a ton of money.
And is it worth it?
Is it worth having that kind of debt on their side, or yours?
Or yours, yeah. Well, because that leads to number 2.
Maybe trade school's the better option, or some other option.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, because that leads to number two, which is trouble with the job market, because there are so many people, and it's not just been pandemic related. It's gotten worse. But in the last decade, the number of kids coming out of college with a degree that don't use it is pretty freaking high. So
Absolutely.
trouble with the
Yeah.
job market. There you go.
Yeah, and I mean, if they've taken on some of these student loans and you've co-signed, or it's, like we mentioned, a Parent Plus loan, I mean, you got to be very conscious of that. What does that look like to you? I've
Yep.
unfortunately got a couple of clients that are in that scenario that, had to help their kids more than they anticipated, thinking that they were going to get this better job, be able to afford this. They didn't.
Yeah.
Now it's on their back.
So they're paying the
fund, and so I mean, it changes the picture now in retirement.
Yeah, they're paying the school loan, right?
Yep.
But now they're also maybe paying the cell phone.
Yeah, exactly.
The car,
maybe the kids are still at home and they're eating out of your fridge still. And I mean, so it's all those other factors that play into it too, that, run the math, understand it, and where do you want to fit? How do you want to be able to help? What does it do to your retirement? And is that something you're willing to take on? And if so, let's figure out how to do it then.
Yeah. And if it's, it seems obvious, right? This is pretty easy, obvious conversations. Well, duh, we've thought about this, but do you? Because oftentimes what happens is we wind up putting things off, and then we just go with whatever's in front of us, right? We just kind of react
exactly
versus plan. And so maybe
that's where mistakes get made.
Right.
I mean, if and are both the spouses on the same page, and that's a key. True.
Yeah.
Maybe one of you are saying, you know what, hey, I understand. I went through that. I don't want to have my kids go through it. We're going to pay for it. The other spouse is like, but we can't afford it. I really don't want to do that. I didn't, I was fine. And, so you first have to be on the same page to some extent and work together, build it into the plan.
Yeah. Well, like anything with retirement, you guys, if you're married, you got to be on the same page. Now, maybe it's grandkids, Phil. So we'll put the kids aside. You had your kids earlier in life. You just, you want to do the grandpa thing. You want to do the grandma thing, and you want to, hopefully you started, contributing to an account, but just talk to me a little bit about, what you see with your clients when it comes to helping the grandkids.
Yeah. And again, it's kind of all over the board, but I've got a lot of clients that do start some kind of a funding for grandkids, education, house, whatever, wedding, whatever it is, what their bigger expenses kind of in that early stage of their life. And if that's a goal, really all these are come down to a goal. If that's what you have as a goal, and an objective that you and your spouse want to build into the plan, great, let's build it in and understand how we get there. And if that is, then, again, let's figure out how to do it. What kind of an account is that? Depends on what you're trying to fund. If it's education, then there's ways to do that, but not education is one piece of it. There's all sorts of other considerations when it comes to grandkids.
Yeah,
maybe it's
I was going to say,
not leaving money for them at the end. You're wanting to enjoy time together. So maybe it's a big annual family vacation. Involving all the grandkids. Maybe that's the only time of year that, if you've got more than one child, that the nieces and nephews get together and get to see each other, and you get that big family experience and build memories.
Yeah. And the one that I've been seeing a lot for a number of years, and it's obviously gotten worse, Phil, with the pandemic, is the whole, we're going to be the kind of caretakers for the grandkids. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes that starts off obviously from a really awesome place, right?
Yes.
You're a grandparent, right? Yep. So, you're like, hey, we want to watch the kids. Well, what happens is it winds up turning into you become the full-time daycare.
Yes.
There's grandparents out there become full-time daycare for grandkids, and that's not their retirement dream, but somehow it gets morphed into that because they're trying to do the right thing by helping their children out who are maybe struggling at this time, and all this you can kind of see how it kind of cycles together. And so you really got to have a plan in place, because before you know it, your retirement is passing you by because you're spending all your time watching the grandkids. That doesn't mean you don't love them, but it's not really what you planned either.
Correct. Yeah. Again, it's understanding both sides of that, equation to what does it look like for you? I mean, for my wife, that was her goal. She always wanted to watch the grandkids.
Okay.
So she retired from her job 5 years ago, something like that. And that's what she's done. And she loves it, which is fine. We're not at retirement stage yet. So that's her job. basically now, and it's helping out our kids, which is awesome.
That works for
And
you, but you plan for that, right?
right. We plan for it, and she's very involved in their life, and it's great. Works really well. I mean, if we had been, 10 years later, earlier stages of retirement, could change the whole picture. Because now all of a sudden, if you were thinking you were going to be doing a lot of travel, but yet the kids are counting on you as being that primary caregiver, helping them out to be able to afford continuing to work and the other things versus daycare.
Yeah.
Again, it's a consideration you've got to walk through to see and bring them into that discussion too, because if that's what they're planning on, but you can't all of a sudden say, I think we're done with this and we're going to start traveling. You got to figure it out.
Well, sometimes you also got to put your foot down. A friend of mine had to do that. It became apparent that that they were going to be the daycare without wanting to be the daycare every day. Yes. And so they took some drastic steps because the kids weren't getting the message, right? Well, look, nobody's helping us out. We really need you to help us out. And it became this thing. And then it started to create a lot of family tension. There really was, the dynamic was not what they wanted. So they took some drastic steps to avoid being the catch-all grandparents that would do everything for the kids. So sometimes, look, we know what our kids are capable of kind of getting to us at, they're good at kind of, weaseling their way into whatever the case might be. Right. So we have to figure out sometimes how to draw those barriers for not only our financial health, but also our mental health and the family dynamics as well. So just bear that in mind when it comes to the grandkids also. Special needs, Phil, let's do a little bit on this because this is a little bit tougher. And I know there's a lot of different nuances to if you've got a special needs child or grandchild.
Yeah. And that's a discussion we always have in the very beginning is there somebody that you're going to have to provide for during your retirement? Because now we've got to build in not just what your retirement plan is, but what does that cost? Special needs often comes up. If you've got a child that is special needs and you're helping fund that, then let's build that in. We've got to make sure it's not just your expenses, but what are you responsible to help them with? If it's not that, maybe they've got some outside care, but you're wanting to help provide for them long-term after you've passed away. That's a whole nother discussion we've got to build in. And how do you financially set things up the right way? And that's where special needs trust and, other factors come into play to make sure that you're building into your plan the provisions for that child today, but then once you passed, because who's going to take care of them if you're the primary caregiver and maybe even financier at this point.
And how you set that stuff up is really crucial too, right, Phil? Because when you're talking wills or trusts or insurance policies or whatever, there's a lot of caveats to some of the special needs stuff.
Yeah, when you get into special needs, it's there's a lot of pitfalls if it's not set up the right way. You can actually, if they have some kind of outside funding, some kind of state care, let's say, or Social Security, disability, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden you passed away, they've inherited a large sum of money. Now they've lost all their benefits, and maybe the amount that they inherited is large, but it's only enough to cover for 5 or 10 years, but their life expectancy is another 30.
Yeah.
And once they've lost that benefit, to get it back is tremendously difficult.
Yeah.
So you don't want to cause damage to their scenario long-term just by your lack of planning, frankly. So you've got to understand special needs. If that's your scenario, make sure you're talking through that with your advisor. And if they don't understand it, definitely get an attorney involved to draft the right documents so that it can be set up the right way to fund for that long-term provision for that child or whoever it is with a special need.
But at the end of it, when you're talking about how the kids play a role in the retirement discussion, often, Phil, the most common thing at the end becomes the generational wealth thing, right? It becomes we want to leave something behind. We already kind of touched on a little bit. Look, you and the spouse have got to be on the same page. Often there's a little disagreement early on there. Mm-hmm. Let's leave them a lot. Let's leave them a little. You guys got to kind of get to the same page. But the government is making it a little tougher for generational wealth to be passed on with some of the rule changes over the last little bit. And so you really got to be working with an advisor to strategize about how to do that as efficiently as possible.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, again, it's like any of these pieces we've talked about. Make it part of your plan. and then keep up with it. It's not just a set it and forget it. If you do want to leave money to the kids, grandkids, how do you want to do that? Do you want them to get everything at once? Do you want it to happen over a period of time? One thing that often comes up in this scenario is, maybe you've got a family cabin or cottage that, you've owned as parents and the kids grew up there, going over there every summer, and you want to make sure that stays in the family. Well, that's great, but how's it going to get funded? Make sure there's a plan in place to build that in if that's your goal. And at the end of the day, is that really what the kids want? You've got to bring them into that discussion too, because maybe that's your goal and your desire, but they don't really want that.
They could care less. Yeah.
And they could care less, Well, that's something you're going to have to come to grips with and understand, if they don't really care, why are you doing it then?
Yeah.
Again, it's a matter of walking through the steps of understanding pros and cons with any decision.
Well, what's a couple of the X's and O's to that, Phil, a little bit? Because since I mentioned the fact that they're making it a little tougher, what are some of the things that you're starting to run into when it comes to trying to leave wealth behind, right? Because obviously the big thing is going to be, well, how do we do this tax efficiently?
Correct. Yeah.
Right?
So it depends on what you're trying to leave. I mean, if you're leaving retirement accounts, understand what that means for those kids or grandkids. It's not like it used to be. They can no longer stretch it out over the remainder of their life expectancy. It's a short period of time.
Yeah, it's 10 years.
10 years could be less, could be a little longer if they're minors, grandkids. So, but understand what that looks like and what is that tax ramification to them. Maybe you should be planning, if that's the goal and you have money set aside, maybe that money shouldn't be an IRA, but it should be a Roth. That way, at least they don't have the tax burden. They've got tax-free money when it comes out. Maybe it should be life insurance. I mean, life insurance is an incredible tool that can be used if you're trying to generate some wealth, generational type wealth in a tax-free manner.
Yeah.
So don't discount life insurance. I know a lot of times the kind of the shield goes up or the flag goes up. Oh, it's life. I don't need life insurance. I don't have a mortgage. The kids aren't going to school. All these different factors that we've been trained to think of. This is where life insurance fits and why you need it. But frankly, passing on wealth is one of the tools. Life insurance is one of the tools that is generally works pretty good for that if it's structured the right way.
Yeah, because we got a $30 trillion, deficit, and there's $40 trillion in retirement money out there, retirement accounts.
Yes.
Got a big old bullseye on it, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so any way that you can find to be more tax efficient, whether it's for yourself or leaving to heirs, should definitely be high on your radar, because your money's high on their radar, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And we've talked about it all throughout the podcast. Tax is a big piece of the overall equation, not just during retirement, but if there is money that you're planning on leaving to heirs, understand what that looks like. Make sure you're managing the taxes from their standpoint as well. Oftentimes I hear, if they inherit money, it's up to them. They can pay the taxes. I don't care. Well, that's fine. Understand what that looks like, though. If there was a better way to structure it and it didn't hurt you, wouldn't you do it?
That's true, right? Yeah,
So
thanks, Dad.
That's right. I get it. Hey, if they have money left over, then they can deal with it. That's great.
It's the boy's problem, right?
But
Yeah, the girl's problem.
There could be a better way to structure it that maybe it's not going to harm you either. Why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah.
So that's don't just throw it out there and discount it. Understand it.
Yeah, I could hear my dad saying that's something he would have done. He'd have been like, that's his problem.
That's right. If you get money, then you deal with it.
Yeah, or I don't think I'm leaving that boy as a credit card statement.
That's right.
Like that. Is usually what I would hear him say. So yeah, it's all about factoring it in, and a lot of it really starts with the conversation between you and the spouse, right? Because more times than not, people are on a lot of they're very different pages there. What do you want to leave? I want to leave them a lot. I want to leave them a little. I want to leave them nothing. I want to, we had to work for it. We're enjoying it. It runs the gamut. So make sure that you're talking with each other and then sharing that with your advisor so that you guys can strategize, and the sooner, the better.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Because there are ways to strategize the right way for that. If your goal is to leave funds over, even if it's not, and oftentimes it's going to be a similar strategy, especially if we're trying to manage taxes. that it could end up benefiting the kids, but it could benefit you or a surviving spouse. I mean, that's another part of that equation you've got to understand. So
got to find the silver linings where we can find them. So if the conversation about the kids and what to do during retirement and how it's going to affect you is on your radar, then make sure you're talking with your advisor about that. If you don't have an advisor, reach out to Phil, give him a call. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you like to use. You can find the number on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, for example, or you could call 248-888-7530. That's the number, 248-888-7530, or you can stop by the website, philstaxhacks.com. That's philstaxhacks.com. You can find the links to all the different things, whether it's Apple, Google, Spotify, so on and so forth. You can see all the past episodes. You can subscribe to new ones, as well as it'll link you back to his main website as well. So everything you need right there at one shop, philstaxhacks.com. For Phil, I'm Mark. We'll see you next time. Phil, thanks for hanging out, buddy.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Take care.
We'll catch you later on Phil's Tax Hacks and other retirement facts.
Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.